The next is Carolina Elices, who is an independent researcher who enjoys investigating the connections between 19th century British literature and architecture. She's particularly interested in the impact of Thomas Hardy's architectural career on his novels and poetry. She has an MA in English Literary Studies from the University of York and a BA in English and Art History from Wesleyan University. She was, again, hoping to be with us in person, but she definitely will come next year, so you can finally meet her then. She has spoken for us before, actually, at the Far From the Madding Crowd Study Day, if anybody remembers, and she was exceptionally good. And the name of her paper today is Sites of Ruin in Tess of the D'Urbervilles.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you today, albeit virtually. I wish I could be there in person, but this will have to do for now. So today I will be discussing sites of ruin and decay in Tess of the D'Urbervilles. So as many of you may know, before Thomas Hardy became an author and a poet, he pursued a career as an architect, where he specialized in church restoration. This may sound like a straightforward and uncontroversial architectural career path, but our modern understanding of the word restoration differs from the 19th century idea of it. During the 19th century, a debate raged on the best course of action to take when conserving older buildings. On the one hand, Victorian restorationists believed old historical buildings serve practical purposes. As an old building aged, therefore, it needed to be remade in new materials in order to continue to discharge its original function. Furthermore, buildings with elements from multiple architectural styles had to be modified in order to conform to a single privileged style. In order to achieve this goal, buildings were demolished and then reconstructed, or various elements were removed and others were moved around. The restorationist agenda could be comprehensive and merciless in its willingness to sacrifice existing features of a building in the name of a particular style and function, particularly as preservationists saw it. Preservationists such as John Ruskin and Hardy, on the other hand, believed that a building, by nature of having existed for many years, possessed a unique history that should be protected. Thus, according to Benjamin Cannon, for preservationists, the building should remain in its, quote, functionally deficient but association-rich original state. To preservationists, efforts to remake portions of a historically rich building destroyed rather than conserved it. The preservationists' ultimate goal was to preserve as much of a building as possible, including different parts from different periods of its history, in order to leave its historic and emotional associations intact. It is these emotional associations in particular that are a crucial part of Hardy's conception of historical buildings. Hardy's speech, Memories of Church Restoration, which was presented at a 1906 meeting of the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, a preservationist group founded by William Morris, not only clarifies the difference between restoration and preservation, but also expresses the important connection humans have with architectural spaces. To Hardy, quote, the essence and soul of an architectural monument does not lie in the particular blocks of stone or timber that compose it, but in the mere forms to which these materials have been shaped. These forms that shape a monument include, quote, human association. And preserving historic architecture represents the, quote, preservation of memories, history, fellowships, fraternities. To restore and thereby replace elements of a building meant destroying those historical and human associations. Ultimately, to Hardy, The conflict between restoration and preservation is a moral conflict, quote, between the purely aesthetic sense and the memorial or associative. Hardy thinks that, quote, the protection of an ancient edifice against renewal in fresh materials is a humane duty. He thus distinguishes between what he considers the superficial, emotionless claims for restoration and the thoughtful, emotional vision of preservation. Preservation for Hardy is more than just a specific technique for caring for a historical building. It is also a means of protecting the memories and history that are intimately connected to architectural space. Hardy's preservationist view that human relationships and architectural spaces are deeply intertwined appears thematically in several of his novels, including Tess of the D'Urbervilles. In Tess, Hardy stresses that Tess's connection to her D'Urberville heritage is useless and superficial by exploring buildings associated with the D'Urbervilles that are sites of ruin and decay, and by demonstrating her lack of personal relationship with these D'Urberville spaces. So there is no memory, history, fellowship, or fraternity to be found in these spaces for Tess. Tess's relation to her D'Urberville heritage is explored in 3 architectural spaces. The, quote, almost new home of the Stoke D'Urbervilles, an architectural manifestation of their false claim to D'Urberville heritage. The Welbridge farmhouse, where Angel and Tess spend their first night together as a married couple, and which used to belong to a D'Urberville. And finally, the D'Urberville vault at Kingsbere. All 3 are sites of decay. The first of moral decay in the form of Alec, the second of structural decay since the building is described as old and moldy, and the third of corporal decay, as it is the site of the D'Urberville tombs. By associating the D'Urberville name and architectural spaces with decay, Hardy stresses the futility of an association with a family that has lost its vitality. Moreover, Tess's lack of true connection to her D'Urberville heritage through any of these architectural spaces highlights the emptiness of valuing a name and ancestry without an emotional or personal association. So the first space is not a true D'Urberville's home. The second provides only a superficial connection in Tess's features being, quote, unquestionably traceable in old family portraits. And the third space serves as a, quote, forcible reminder that her family is, quote, socially extinct. Ultimately, Tess's lack of connection to D'Urberville buildings, and by extension, the memories, history, fellowships, and fraternities contained within those spaces, portends the futility and even danger of valuing a mere family name. From the start of Tess, even as John Durbeyfield discovers his D'Urberville heritage, it is emphasized that this potentially socially influential name is utterly unconnected to material manifestations of that influence, namely mansions, estates, and land. When Parson Tringham reveals to John Durbeyfield that he is the, quote, direct lineal representative of the ancient and knightly family of the D'Urbervilles, it is not long before Durbeyfield begins to inquire after the material benefits of being attached to such an illustrious name. When he asks where the D'Urbervilles live, the parson replies, "You don't live anywhere. You are extinct as a county family." The use of extinct to describe the D'Urberville family anticipates the decaying and ruined buildings we will see that are associated with them. When Durbeyfield inquires after the, quote, family mansions and estates and lands, the parson declares that there are, quote, none. This clear indication that there is no material advantage to be gained through the family association is compounded by the parson's declaration that the Durbeyfield family's connection to the D'Urbervilles is simply, quote, a fact of some interest to the local historian and genealogist, nothing more. Thus, from the beginning, Hardy is emphasizing just how futile valuing a mere family name is. particularly when there are no material or even personal benefits attached to it. Mansions and estates would not only provide economic and social advantages, but also present spaces in which to cultivate memories, history, fellowships, and fraternities, particularly within the d'Urberville family. Without these material assets, or the personal benefits of being able to form relationships with family, the only real value from knowledge of the Durbeyfield and d'Urberville connection is to historians and genealogists, who are not emotionally or personally invested in the knowledge. Already then, there is an impersonal emptiness and deadness attached to this supposed acquisition of a family. Although there are less prominent d'Urberville ruins that litter the landscape of Tess, including, quote, the fragment of an old manor house of Caroline date, which is located by Talbothays Dairy, and the, quote, green foundations of a former d'Urberville mansion by the vault at Kingsbere. The lack of vitality and particularly decay associated with the d'Urberville name is demonstrated in three main architectural spaces. The first being the Stoke d'Urberville home, the Slopes. The Slopes is described as follows. Quote, it was of recent erection, indeed almost new, and of a rich crimson color. Behind the bright brick corner of the house stretched the soft azure landscape of the Chase, a truly venerable tract of forest land, of undoubtedly primeval date. All was contrary to Tess's expectation. I thought we were an old family, but this is all new, she said. The Slopes is a subversion of expectations, both for Tess and the reader. This home is, quote, bright, new, and crimson, a striking contrast to the, quote, azure primeval landscape around it. What should be an ancient and dignified seat of the d'Urberville family is modern and garish. While the building's facade seems to be an outward display of vitality, perhaps too much vitality as it is so new, it conceals a pervasive moral decay within. As the reader learns a few lines later, this house is so new because the d'Urbervilles who live here are not true d'Urbervilles. Their ancestor, Simon Stoke, simply thumbed through, quote, the pages of works devoted to extinct, half-extinct, obscured, and ruined families, considered that d'Urberville looked and sounded as well as any of them, and d'Urberville accordingly was annexed to his own name for himself and his heirs eternally. This house, known as, quote, Mrs. d'Urberville's seat, is in fact built upon a lie, so that moral decay, or at least questionable morals, are inherent in the architectural foundations of the home, as well as the ancestral foundations of the family. It is crucial, too, that by the time Simon Stoke was searching for a new family name, the d'Urbervilles were already associated with ruin and decay, being one of the, quote, extinct, half-extinct, obscured, and ruined families in the area. The d'Urbervilles, then, have not been associated with vitality for some time. The decay, at least in the moral sense, has only continued with the newest generation of the Stoke d'Urbervilles, Alec d'Urberville. He even admits himself that he is, quote, a bad fellow, a damn bad fellow, to say nothing of his poor treatment of Tess. He, like his ancestor Simon Stoke, lies about his d'Urberville heritage, calling Tess cousin, even though he knows they are not actually related. Thus, there is no kind of memory, history, fellowship, or fraternity to be found for Tess in the supposed d'Urberville home of the Slopes. According to Hardy's SPAB speech, memories, history, fellowships, and fraternities can only be found and preserved in ancient buildings, not modern ones. Any history the mansion house has is fairly recent and not truly d'Urberville history anyway. The recent memories Tess develops at the house are rather more unpleasant considering Alec than anything else. Any fellowships or fraternities Tess forms with this alleged branch of the d'Urberville family are predicated on a lie. Tess believes she is connecting with relatives when in reality they are no more related to her than strangers are. Hardy stresses the futility and even danger of valuing the D'Urberville name for Tess, as Tess has no real personal familial connection to her D'Urberville heritage through the Slopes. Similarly, the Welbridge farmhouse where Angel and Tess spend their wedding night provides another example of decay in association with the D'Urbervilles, as well as a prime instance of just how superficial Tess's connection to her heritage is. This building was, quote, once portion of a fine manorial residence, and the property and seat of a D'Urberville, but since its partial demolition, a farmhouse. Welcome to one of your ancestral mansions, said Claire, but he regretted the pleasantry. It was too near a satire. The, quote, partial demolition of the building, as well as its complete transformation from a, quote, fine manorial residence to a farmhouse, indicates that it has been subject to restoration as opposed to preservation, because it has not been kept in a state that is as close as possible to its original one. In 7 Lamps of Architecture, preservationist John Ruskin decries restoration as, quote, the most total destruction which a building can suffer. Restoration is a lie from beginning to end. The old building is destroyed more totally and mercilessly than if it had sunk into a heap of dust or melted into a mass of clay. Thus, the Welbridge farmhouse is no longer a D'Urberville home in either theory or practice. Any D'Urberville memories, histories, fellowships, or fraternities that remained within the space would have been destroyed as soon as the architectural space was transformed. Angel's regret at jokingly welcoming Tess to her ancestral mansions because it is, quote, too near a satire only strengthens this notion. It is almost satirical, yes, because Tess and her family do not actually own this former D'Urberville home, but it is also practically satirical because according to the preservationist view, without the human associations and relationships that would have been formed within the original building, it is not really a D'Urberville home anymore. It is now just a farmhouse. Like the Slopes, the Welbridge farmhouse is ostensibly connected to the D'Urbervilles, but because it lacks any emotional or personal connections to the family, it is merely an indication of just how obsolete the family has become. Moreover, the Welbridge farmhouse, like the Slopes, is a site of decay, in this case structural rather than moral. The farmhouse is described as, quote, old, moldy, and drafty, which suggests that its restoration has not really improved its structural condition. It is still slowly aging and moldering, a structural metaphor for the slow extinction of the D'Urberville family. Tess's superficial connection to her D'Urberville heritage is demonstrated by her passing resemblance to 2 portraits of her D'Urberville ancestors in the Welbridge farmhouse. These portraits are of, quote, women of middle age of a date some 200 years ago, the long-pointed features of the one so suggestive of merciless treachery, the billhook nose, large teeth, and bold eye of the other, suggesting arrogance to the point of ferocity, haunt the beholder afterwards in his dreams. They were ladies of the D'Urberville family, the ancient lords of this manor. The unpleasantness of the matter was that Tess's fine features were unquestionably traceable in these exaggerated forms. These 2 terrifying women's features seem to be outward indicators of their characters. The one is capable of, quote, merciless treachery, and the other of, quote, arrogance to the point of ferocity. Tess has, luckily, inherited neither of these qualities, but her features are, quote, traceable in theirs, no matter how, quote, exaggerated the portraits may be. Still, the only knowledge of her family Tess can glean from these portraits is that she shares some physical features with her relatives. She cannot learn anything about who these women truly were as people, other than what might be implied by their physical characteristics, nor can she learn any further history of her family other than the most basic facts. These portraits serve as a reminder that Tess has no emotional connection to or understanding of the history of her family, merely a superficial connection to them through a slight familial resemblance. Finally, the d'Urberville vault at Kingsbere serves as the ultimate symbol of ruin and decay, both corporal and familial. The tombs of the d'Urberville family are described as, quote, covering in their dates several centuries. They were canopied, altar-shaped, and plain, their carvings being defaced and broken, their brasses torn from the matrices. Of all the reminders that Tess had ever received that her people were socially extinct, there was none so forcible as this spoliation. As Peter J. Casagrande puts it, Tess's, quote, ancestral tomb, like the d'Urberville family itself, is in a state of advanced decay. The tombs have clearly not been maintained or taken care of. Parts are, quote, broken, defaced, and torn. Not only is the outer state of the tombs one of disarray and destruction, but also, of course, the dead bodies from several centuries that are housed inside the tombs are surely in an advanced state of decay. Had the tombs been maintained through a preservationist process, Tess might perhaps have been able to learn something of her family's history, memories, fellowships, and fraternities. Without any kind of conservation process, however, the tombs are simply a, quote, forcible reminder to Tess that her family is, quote, socially extinct. Tess feels no personal or emotional connection to her d'Urberville heritage on seeing the tombs, emphasizing that a connection to a family without any personal or emotional investment is to belong to a family in name only, and that it is futile to try to value that ultimately meaningless association. As Hardy declares, ultimately, Tess's d'Urberville heritage possesses only, quote, imaginative value to the dreamer. It is a, quote, little curiosity about poor Tess's blood and name that would soon be forgotten. The ancient buildings where Tess should be able to form real emotional connections with her heritage and experience history are full of decay and deterioration that serve as reminders of the d'Urberville family's decline into oblivion and extinction. For Hardy, buildings can be sites of human connection and emotional import, but they must be maintained and conserved in order to preserve the potential for memories, history, fellowships, and fraternities. Thank you.